Hi Daily 4th graders. Today we are going to discuss Module 6, Lesson 3. Lesson 3 is about exploring many different representations for numbers. We're going to start off with this picture. So here in this picture you'll see that we have some place value discs. And each of these place value discs represents 1/10. We know they represent 1/10 because we see that in the ones place there's a 0, so we don't have any ones. We have a decimal, and that decimal tells us that we are entering place values that are smaller than 1 whole. And then we have a 1 in the tenths place. So that tells us that each of these place value discs represents 1/10. My first question for you is, and it's not a trick question, how many tenths do we have altogether? You may want to pause the video so you can count all of the tenths. Alrighty, so after counting all of these tenths, you should have found that we have 25 tenths. We have a row of 10, another row of 10, and then 5. 10 plus 10 plus 5 gives us 25, and our unit is tenths. So we have 25 tenths. What I want you to do before we start discussing the different ways that we can represent 25 tenths, I want you to explore them on your own. So we decided, or we found that there were 25 tenths represented in this picture. Here I wrote it in unit form, 25 tenths. And I would like for you to write this down on your paper as well. Before we continue, I want you to pause the video and I want you to explore how many different ways you can represent 25 tenths. Now I want you to think about how you can use numbers. Maybe you use words. Well, we used words here, but maybe you have another way to express it in words. Maybe you do visual models. I don't know. See if you can show at least 3 ways to represent 25 tenths. Pause the video and then we're going to go over it together. Alrighty, so hopefully you paused the video and did some exploring on your own. But the first thing that I want us to cover, again, here we have 25 tenths, and we wrote it here in unit form. The first thing that I want us to do is to think about how this can be written as a fraction. This might be one of the easiest forms to go to from here. 25 tenths. So we know that tenths can be used as a unit in fractions, can be used as the denominator, and this 25 can be our numerator. So another way that we can represent 25 tenths is using a fraction. 25 tenths. Alrighty. We can also take this 25 tenths as a fraction and we can convert it to a mixed fraction, right? So if you haven't done so already, I would like for you to solve that. Find 25 tenths as a mixed fraction. I want you to pause real quick and solve that, and then we'll go over it together. Alrighty, so let's go over it. So 25 tenths, if we were to make this a mixed number, we think our whole is 10. We think about how many wholes we have in 25 tenths. So 1 whole would be 10 tenths, 2 wholes would be 20 tenths, 3 wholes would be 30 tenths. But we only have 25 tenths, so we know that we have 2 wholes, because 2 wholes would be 20 tenths, and then that leaves us with 5 tenths left over. So we know that 25 tenths as a mixed fraction would be 2 and 5 tenths. Alrighty. So we can write 25 tenths in unit form. We can also write it as a fraction, whether it's an improper fraction or a mixed fraction. I want us to go to another way of representing this number. And I'm going to start off by asking you a question. So going back to our original place value discs, our 25 tenths, can you think of a way to group these tenths? in a way that will help us to rewrite 25 tenths. Instead of writing it in unit form, 25 tenths. Is there a way that we can group these place value discs, these tenths, so that we can rewrite it? I want you maybe to think back to Module 1 when we were studying place value charts, and we did a lot of regrouping. So maybe you saw that when you add together 10 tenths, remember this whole line shows us 10 tenths. Let's see, I'll go from this side. 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths, 10 tenths. Okay, 10 tenths. What number is equivalent to 10 tenths? You could also think of it as, if we're working with the unit tens. If you have 10 tens, it gives us 100. What do you think 10 tenths would give us? You're right, it gives us 1 whole. So 10 tenths is 1 whole. Another group of 10 tenths, that gives us another whole. And then we have 5 tenths right there. So we have 1, 2, and 5 tenths. So, hey, we just figured out how to write 25 tenths as a decimal. So again, we knew that we had 2 wholes, and then we had 5 tenths left over. 2 and 5 tenths. Now again, some people might read this as 2.5, which is kind of a quick way that people read decimals. However, we want to be precise mathematicians, and we want to use the proper language, so we will always be reading it as 2 and 5 tenths, not 2.5. Okay, so here we have 4 different ways to represent 25 tenths, and we're not even finished. Next, I want us to think about the units that we have. So looking at 2 and 5 tenths, what are the units that we have in this decimal? What are the units that we have? We have 2, that's right, ones, and we have 5, that's right, tenths, 2 and 5 tenths. So I now want us to show 2 and 5 tenths in expanded form. And oh my gosh, we did expanded form at the very beginning of the year. Maybe you recall, or maybe you need a little reminder. 2 and 5 tenths, we want to expand it. We want to show its units. So again, we agreed that we have ones and tenths. How many ones do we have? That's right, we have 2 ones. So in expanded form, we could show 2 times 1. And then how many tenths do we have? That's right, we have 5 tenths. So we show 2 times 1 times 5 times 1 tenth. This is 2 and 5 tenths in expanded form. Great work, you guys. And we're almost finished. So the last thing that I want us to do is, we showed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways to show 25 tenths in words and numbers. What about a visual model? I want us to use a visual model, and I'm going to go over one visual model, but you might come up with another way to show it. What I am going to do is I'm going to do a number line. Okay, so if I wanted to show 2 and 5 tenths on a number line, I need to make some benchmarks. Okay, what do you think these benchmarks should be? What do you think my benchmark should be? I agree with you. It should be 2, let me just write it, 2 and 3. Because 2 and 5 tenths, it's greater than 2 but less than 3, so we're going to use those as our benchmarks. And we know that we have tenths as our unit, so we know that we're going to split this into 10 pieces, 10 increments. And I know each of these increments is worth 1 tenth, so I'm going to go to 5 tenths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tenths. And this will show 2 and 5 tenths. Maybe you come up with another way to show it visually other than a number line. Maybe an area model or something else. Who knows? All right, friends. So in this lesson, hopefully you found that there are so many ways that we can represent numbers. And you are going to practice this on your own. What you are going to be doing for your homework assignment is you are going to be searching around your house for some decimals. Now, as I was thinking, where in my own house that I would find decimals, I was having a little bit of trouble. I was thinking to myself, where can I find decimals in my own house? You might need to ask your parents for help with this, but a few things came to mind for me. I thought of bills, specifically when looking at money, the cost. So that might be something that you might want to ask your parents if you can take a look at a bill, because money, essentially, dollars and cents, it is very, very similar to, ones and tenths. It's very similar to decimals. So you might want to use a bill and look at some money. Maybe you look at a stopwatch and you look at the decimal, the time that's on your stopwatch, and that stopwatch is actually showing a decimal. And maybe you can find decimals in other places. I'm not really sure. If you're having trouble finding a decimal somewhere in your house, make up a decimal. It's totally okay. And I suggest, actually, it's kind of a requirement. Your decimal should not have more units than tenths. It can have hundreds, tens, ones. That's fine. And it can have tenths, but don't go past tenths. Don't go to hundredths or thousandths, just because we haven't gotten there yet. Alrighty, and in your homework, you are going to find a decimal, and then your assignment is to show as many ways you can to write that decimal, using unit form, using it as a fraction, a decimal, a visual model, expanded form, and there may be some other questions as well. All right, guys, I know this was a long video, but thanks for hanging in there, and I look forward to seeing the decimals that you guys found. And if you wouldn't mind sharing your decimal and where you found it. Or if you made it up, that's okay, you just let us know. All right, guys, well, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.